3.
But even no 4, you know.
Yeah. So we did discussed till this question enough.
Yes,
What is the
yes.
purpose of user group?
Mm-hmm,
And the
mm-hmm.
next question that we are going to discuss here is why is buffering commonly used for input-output operations? Okay. So what do you know about buffer? Or what is a buffer? Do you have any idea what is a buffer?
Buffering. I believe is a, if I'm not wrong, is a is a part of a memory where a data is temporarily stored while is moving from one place to another, or data is temporarily stored in a memory, I believe. No.
Correct. So it is basically a portion which is like the physical memory, whatever memory you have in your system, whether it's a desktop or laptop. Maybe you have a 4 GB of RAM or maybe 8 GB of RAM, whatever the physical memory is there.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, whenever we power on a system, whether it's a desktop or laptop, so the operating system that is there in our system, it is actually taking up a space in the RAM, and that's where it is getting loaded. And everything that we see on our display screen, basically it gets loaded into the RAM, and then only it comes up on the screen. Okay, so anything when we are typing anything, or maybe any output that we are viewing on our display screen on our monitor, so basically it is getting loaded into the RAM. RAM is that hardware which actually contains the software or whatever the information that needs to be displayed on the screen. So buffer is it's a free space. If you have a buffer space in your RAM, so you can hold as much as data or information, or maybe multiple process can run in a system if you have a greater buffering space in your RAM. So it is basically the free space or the available space in RAM where you can load information, or where you can load your softwares. So if the buffer is full, sometimes in troubleshooting, technical troubleshooting or
Mm-hmm.
issues, we sometimes see that when we access a server, we are not able to access the server. We are not getting a response back from the server. So the reason, sometimes we identify that there is a buffer overflow that has happened in the server.
Which it
So
means is full in this
yeah,
case.
yeah,
Memory is
yeah.
full.
The RAM that it has, because every request that comes to a server, the server need a space in the RAM so that it can receive the request, and then it can process the request. But if that available space is already full, so it cannot handle any more request, and that's why it rejects request. Every request is rejected, and that is called a buffer overflow.
All
So as
right.
you can see on my, okay, I think I need to share this just. Okay, can you see the document?
Yes, 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 yes.
So regarding buffer, we can definitely say a buffer is a memory area that stores data being transferred between two devices, or between a device and an application. But generally, as I mentioned, it is the free space that is there in your physical RAM, where it can accept more requests, and that's how it can process the request. So the question here was, why is buffering commonly used for input-output operations? So regarding that, the uses that we see about input-output buffering is done to deal effectively with a speed mismatch. So basically, it may happen that the requester, the client PC or the client machine, which is sending you a request to the server. So the server generally have a very good configuration. It has a very high level of hardware, software configuration, as well as network parameters also. It has a high bandwidth, and all network functionalities are performing perfectly fine in the server. But in case of a client, the client may not have a good amount of hardware or software. Maybe the network, the internet link is not very fast in case of the request that is coming from a client. So in that case, in order to deal this speed mismatch, how a request is coming to the server and how it is going to process. So definitely buffering helps in that. So it is done to deal effectively with a speed mismatch between the producer and the consumer of the data stream. So here producer is generally the requester or the client PC, which is generating a request to the server, and a consumer here could be maybe server, or maybe the reverse could also be possible. Maybe the server is too
Yes,
overwhelmed. Yeah, yeah. Go
vice
ahead.
versa. Mhm.
Vice
No, I
versa.
said
Correct,
vice
correct,
versa. Yes.
correct. And the second thing is buffer is produced in main memory to heap up the bytes received from modem. So even if like we are having a network connectivity with some modem, nowadays modem is obsolete a little bit. Nowadays we only use broadband routers or any other gateway devices or firewalls. But again, there could be modem because the broadband modems, they have an inbuilt broadband routers that we use. They have an inbuilt modem nowadays. We call them modem router. So the modem, earlier it was a separate device. Have you heard of the term modem?
Modem, yeah, modem. I do believe have two functions, modulator and demodulator. I think, yeah,
Correct,
it's
correct,
a
correct.
convert convert the signal that come through the thing. Yeah.
Basically, a modem is a device which is used to convert a digital signal to analog, and the
Yes.
reverse, the vice versa, analog to digital.
Yes.
Because earlier
Mhm.
we used to have the copper wire telephone lines only, which were there, and computers are digital devices. They can only understand digital language or digital signal, whereas a copper wire can only support analog signal. So that's why we required a modem at both the end, at the receiving end as well as the sending end also. So whenever a computer which is sending data to a server, so it sends the data in a digital signal, and modem converts it into analog, and then that analog signal is passed on through the copper wire, and then again in the receiving end at the server end there should be another modem which will again convert the analog signal back to digital signal, and then it will be received by the server. So again, so there also when these request, this digital signal is being sent to the modem and how it receives. So there could again be use of a buffer which is used in main memory. So the bytes that are being sent from the sending device, they may heap up in the modem, and then they are processed, and then they are converted into analog signal, and the vice versa. So the third point here is after receiving the data in the buffer, the data get transferred to disk from buffer in a single operation. So generally, like when we are viewing a video or maybe a audio stream, so basically it happens due to some latency in the bandwidth or network issues. So certain part of the data, the audio file or the video file that we are watching or listening, so they come in a buffer. So basically in a small part, the entire file is broken into small part, and then they are being received. But ultimately when they are received in the receiving end, so they work like a single file. The it is executed like a single file, so we can see the entire video streaming, or we can see the entire audio, we can listen to the audio
Mhm.
file. So this
Yes.
process of data transfer is not instantaneous. Therefore, the modem needs another buffer in order to store additional incoming data. So it could be there could be some sending packets, in technical, in networking we say TX transfer packets, and RX is receiving packets. So there are some sending packets and receiving packets that are coming in the modem. So definitely it may need another buffer, one for receiving the packets and another for sending the packets. So there could be two different buffers depending on the requirement. When the first buffer got filled, then it is requested to transfer the data to the disk. So once the first buffer, the space that is there, if it is filled, then it is being requested to save in the disk. If it is a hard disk or any other storage medium, then we, like in a practical scenario, when we write some file in our DVD writer, through the DVD writer to a DVD, blank DVD or CD. So there also the concept of buffer is there. When we are writing any content into the DVD or CD, so it is being actually collected as a buffer, and then it is being written into the medium, into the CD or DVD, the media where we store the data. So when the first buffer got filled, then it is requested to transfer the data to the disk. So the disk could be a hard disk, it could be a CD, DVD, or maybe it could be a magnetic tape also. Sometimes in big corporates, they use some magnetic tape called LTO. So these type of devices where they store the data. So even whenever we are saving the data, so it may collect in a buffer, and then once it is filled up, it has been transferred to the disk. The model
Yes.
then starts filling the additional incoming data in the second buffer, while the data in the first buffer getting transferred to the disk. So if it is having two buffers, so definitely once the first buffer is filled up, so it will be written to the disk, and in the second buffer it will collect for next informations. So this is how buffer is helpful in input output operations. So
Yes.
the
Yes. I
next,
get that. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Just
sure,
just to clarify something. When you said the data came as a uh, has a buffer, or it come like a buffer, you mean like it come like a small portion?
correct, correct. So the whole file, the total file could be a 1 GB size, or maybe 700 MB or 800 MB size file. But when it is coming at the time of, maybe we are at the receiving end, maybe it is in a desktop, or maybe when we are writing it into a disk or something. So there could be, as I mentioned, the physical memory that is present in your system, whether it's a desktop or laptop. So as you understand that the operating system that is running on your system, that also takes a certain part of your RAM. So if you have a 4 GB
Yes.
RAM or 8 GB RAM, so it's not, even if you just go and search for the system requirements for Windows 10 or Linux or any other operating system, you will get to see that every operating system has got a specific hardware requirements. And in that
Mhm.
requirement, it is mentioned that for a Windows 10 32-bit, maybe you can have 2 GB of RAM, but it is not recommended. It should be at least 4 GB. And like for a Windows 10 64-bit of operating system, it is 4 GB is a minimum that is required, because if you install it in a 2 GB RAM system, maybe it will load up, but you will not be able to work properly.
Yeah,
So
too
the
slow.
operating, yeah, so the operating system itself requires a certain amount of RAM from your physical RAM that is there. So that's why the
That's
free space that will be there. The more the free space you have, so the more it will be helpful for your day-to-day
oh,
activity.
yes. That's correct. Yes, I get that.
So that is the thing. And the next question, okay, are you able to see the question, or maybe I should share? Yeah. So the next question that is there is, outline the boot process of a system using UEFI. Highlight two benefits of UEFI has over BIOS. So what do you know about UEFI? What is your understanding? What is a UEFI?
Mm,
Or have
yes,
you heard
fine.
of the term BIOS? Do you know what is BIOS?
Bias, but I think the modern laptops or the computers, they don't use bias anymore, I believe, no? Or they still.
Uh, Correct.
Eh, yes.
The latest
Basic basic
motherboards. Correct.
in, input output system, yeah.
Yeah. But again, there could be, like, depending on certain colleges or educational organizations, or maybe some government bodies, they may still be using some old desktop or laptop. So maybe we can see BIOS there. But in corporate offices, generally they have the latest hardware, latest motherboards and latest servers, everything with the latest technology. So every new motherboard that is coming nowadays, they are having UEFI. It is Unified Extensible Firmware Interface. So basically, we can say it is the latest version of BIOS. BIOS is
Bias,
the
yes.
term. The term BIOS is a legacy term. We used it for legacy BIOS software, and UEFI is the latest BIOS that we talk about. So
Yeah.
there are some basic differences between BIOS and UEFI. So do you have any idea what is the difference that we have in BIOS and UEFI?
Not really. No.
Okay,
No.
like in a practical scenario, if you see BIOS and UEFI interface, so have you ever entered into a BIOS
Bias,
interface?
bias, yes, 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 yes. I
Okay,
did. I did.
so you must have viewed the interface, how they look. If you just see the BIOS and UEFI interfaces. Okay, can you see this image?
Yes, yes.
So basically, it is a screen. It is an image which has been shown where the left hand side is the legacy BIOS, how it looks like. It is generally a textual interface which is having a blue screen and maybe a white background with some blue letters, and only a keyboard can work in a legacy BIOS. If you have
Yeah,
a legacy BIOS, you have to work with the keyboard only. Mouse is not going
yes.
to work in your legacy BIOS. Whereas in the right hand side, as you can see, this is a,
Mouse can work.
yeah,
Hmm.
mouse and keyboard both
Okay.
can work. And UEFI
Hmm.
has a very attractive graphical interface, and it has many features. As you can see, like it shows what is the present temperature of your CPU, how much RAM is being utilized, how much is free. So everything is graphically represented, whether your CPU is getting overheated, and even like what are the storage medium that are there in the lower portion. It will show you the storage, whether it's a hard disk or SSD, or it is a CD DVD writer, or maybe an external hard disk. So everything is shown in the dashboard, and it is very colorful and attractive also. And definitely it has some more importance and benefits, like the BIOS, with the legacy BIOS, it couldn't actually identify. There is something called boot sequence in system, in computer, when we power on a computer. So there is something called boot sequence. Like whenever we power on the CPU unit, certain things happen one by one, step by step, and they ultimately result in loading up your desktop, and you get your desktop icons. So the first thing that happens in a boot sequence is, immediately when we power on our computer, a small utility software, which is the BIOS, it gets loaded into the RAM. And on the screen you can see a black screen with some small white text letters scrolling up. So that is the first software that runs on your computer, and the main job of BIOS is to initiate all the hardware components of your computer, like your RAM, your hard disks, and your processor, to initiate every hardware, your keyboard and mouse, whether they are properly connected or not. So it first checks whether all the hardware are connected properly or not, and then once it finds that all the hardwares are connected properly, then it loads proper device driver for each of the devices. For keyboard, it has a keyboard driver. For mouse, it has a mouse driver. So these are called interrupt handler or device driver. Now the thing is, finally when it checks and find out which are the devices connected with the motherboard, then finally it looks for a boot.ini file. A boot.ini file is that file which is there in your operating system, and that is the first file which is initiated, so that the operating system gets loaded into RAM, so that you can see your desktop. Now, in this case, if it is a BIOS, so it actually cannot identify whether sometimes some machine may get infected with some malware or viruses. So even they can create some boot.ini file, some fake boot.ini file, and they can infect the master boot record (MBR) that is there in the system. So legacy BIOS doesn't have that capacity, doesn't have that
Hmm.
knowledge to identify which boot.ini is a genuine and which one is a fake. So sometimes it may load up the virus infected boot.ini, which is not a actual boot.ini, and that's why we see that certain machine get becomes very slow when we start up the device. It becomes very slow because before the original operating system gets loaded, the virus starts its activity, and that's why the system becomes very low. So this feature has been it is being overcome or fixed in the latest BIOS, which is called UEFI. In UEFI,
Okay.
they have a inbuilt feature where they have a custom signature for each and every genuine operating system. If it is a Windows 7, if it is a Windows 8, 8.1, 10, every operating system has got a specific signature file which is present in the UEFI, and that's why UEFI can identify that whether the boot.ini is of a genuine operating system or whether it is a fake one.
It's a
So
four.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So that helps our system to be more secured if we have UEFI system. And another thing is, in BIOS, we generally can partition the hard disks only into four different partition, like C, D, E, F. If you want to partition your hard disk, so the maximum partition that you can
Four.
create is 4. But in case of UEFI, you can increase the partition. You can have as many as partition depending on your hard disk. So these are certain benefits. So coming back to the question, that
Basically, basically the legacy bias was there